right, hope you guys are doing well. I'm going to walk you through these questions here, save us some time in class. This might take a while, we'll find out. But this type of question here, determine which type of triangle. We first need to make sure that we can make a triangle. Are the two smaller sides added together? Do they add up to equal more than the bigger side? Yep, 16 plus 20 is more than 24. Now we do the Pythagorean theorem. 16 squared plus 12 squared, how does that compare to 24 squared? When I do the math, I get 656 is greater than 576. So the c squared is smaller than, I get a cute. Okay, the next one, are the two smaller sides greater than the third side? Be careful here, they're out of order. The bigger side's in the middle. So it's 5 plus 12, or 5 plus 7 more than 10? Of course it is. So we can make a triangle. Now we do the Pythagorean theorem. 25 plus 49 is 74, which is less than 100. The c squared is greater than the a squared plus b squared. It is obtuse. Number 3, is 8 plus 10 more than 18? The answer is no, it is not. It's equal. It has to be more than. So that is not a triangle. You cannot make a triangle. We have square roots here. Don't forget, we can't just go 10 plus 13. That's the square root of 10. The square root of 10 is a little bit more than 3. Because the square root of 9 is 3. The square root of 13 is more than 3 as well. It's less than the square root of 16, which is 4. This is going to be between 4 and 5, square root of 16 and square root of 25. So is 3 plus 4 more than, 3 plus 3 more than 4 point something? Yes, it is. Now I do the Pythagorean theorem. 10 plus 13 is 23, which is greater than 21. That makes for an acute triangle. You pause and move to a place. All right, for the next type of question, one of the most important things is identifying, well, what you have and then which tool we're going to use to solve. In this deal, this is an isosceles triangle. This big triangle is isosceles because that is, because these two sides are the same. And so this is an altitude. You recognize the altitude because of the right angle there. An altitude of an isosceles triangle is also going to split that 10 in half. So, because it split the 10 in half, I now have this right triangle where 5x and 25 are the sides. 25 is the hypotenuse, so I go 5 squared plus x squared is equal to 25 squared. Now we go solve, solve, solve. X equals 10 square root 10. Square root of 600 simplifies to 10 square root 6. I think I said that backwards. So yes, the answer here is 10 square root 6. All right, for the next question, it tells you it's a rectangle. Because it's a rectangle, those opposite sides are congruent. That's because it's a parallelogram, of course, the right angles. And so hopefully you can see the right triangle. The diagonal is the hypotenuse of the right triangle. So it's 8 squared plus 10 squared equals x squared. Solve, solve, solve. Square root of 164 simplifies down to 2 square root 41. Okay? The next one here is pretty straight up, just the Pythagorean theorem. You know it's Pythagorean theorem because you got the right triangle. Two sides are given. The unknown is the third. So x squared plus 5 squared equals 2 square root 10 squared. The hypotenuse is opposite the right angle, 2 square root 10. X squared plus 25 is equal to, here we got to square the 2, which is 4. And when we square the square root 10, we just get 10. So 4 times 10 equals 40. Hold on. So x squared plus 25 equals 40. Subtract x squared equals 15. Square root of both sides. The square root of 15, which is just simply 3 times 5. Nothing comes out. Square root of 15 is simplified. All right, this next question. What's important here is that we have this half of this rectangle. Those two right angles. So what we want to do is make a full rectangle, which therefore also makes a right triangle. We end up with a rectangle and a right triangle on this type of shape. So because it's a rectangle, x follows over here to x, 7 and 7. This whole side was 13. If I clear out everything here, that whole side's 13. We've just now said that this part of it is 7. So what is this missing part? hopefully you see that it's part plus part equals whole. Something plus 7 equals 13, that's 6. So this piece, which is actually a side of this right triangle, is 6. So now I have a right triangle. I have two sides. 6 and 10 are known. X is my unknown. It's 6 squared plus x squared is equal to 10 squared. When you solve that, you should get 8. Number 9 is the one I called buy one, get one free. We have a x is part of this right triangle, but we only know that this one side is square root 5. We don't know what that side is. However, that side is also a part of this right triangle where I do know two sides. So I can use this right triangle to solve for the missing side, which will then let me solve for the other one. I'm going to call that missing side n. Don't call it x, because this side is already x. Call this one something else. I called it n. I'm going to solve this right triangle. Square root 3 squared plus n squared equals square root 10 squared. 3 plus n squared equals 10. So n squared equals 7. So n is simply the square root of 7. Now I can solve for the triangle on top, the one I got highlighted in yellow. Square root 7 squared plus square root 5 squared is equal to x squared. 7 plus 5 is x squared. 12. Square root 12 simplifies to 2 square root 3. That's how that one works. Hopefully you recognize that this big triangle here is isosceles. 17 and 17 help us to know that it's isosceles. 15 here is an altitude with the right angle. What does that altitude do? It splits up that other side into congruent pieces. So this whole thing here is x. X gets chopped in half. Well, I want to call that something else. I'm going to call it n and n. Now here's my right triangle. I know two sides, 15 and 17, 17 being the hypotenuse. Let's go solve for n. N squared plus 15 squared equals 17 squared. Solve, solve, solve. N squared equals 64. N equals 8. That is not our answer. We're trying to solve for x, which that means that n is 8 here, n is 8 there. N plus n is 8 plus 8, 16 is the answer to the question. All right. That gets us to this guy. The key here, when you see the right angle here and the altitude with the right angle there, I end up with 3 right triangles. The small one here, the bigger one but smaller here, and the biggest one there. That means that the pieces of the hypotenuse and the entire hypotenuse are gonna make geometric means with x, y, and z actually being the geometric means. So x is the geometric mean between the parts of the hypotenuse that it shares a triangle with. X shares a triangle with 4, and then x shares a triangle with the big triangle, which is 4 plus 6 is 10. So x is a geometric mean between 4 and 10. X squared equals 40, x equals square root 40, which simplifies to square root 10. Y shares its triangle with which pieces of 4, 6, and 10? It shares the little triangle here with 4, and then the medium-sized triangle 6. So it's the geometric mean between 4 and 6. I'm taking some shortcuts here. I just said y squared equals 4 times 6, and then y equals the square root of 24. Hopefully you're recognizing that we just always end up taking the square root of the product. 24, square root 24 simplifies to 2 square root 6. And then z shares a triangle with 6 and 10. So z equals square root 60, 2 square root 15. So I did not use the Pythagorean theorem to solve there. Instead, we're using geometric means. That's when you have the big right triangle and then the two smaller ones created by the altitude. Number 12, I see the altitude here. Hopefully you do too. But is this angle right there a right angle? And the answer is no, it's not. That's not perpendicular. So this is not a geometric mean question, because that needs to be a right triangle in order to create the geometric means. Instead here, this is actually more like this guy. This is the buy one, get one free, where I have the shared side. I can use the Pythagorean theorem here. 5 squared is going to equal 3 squared plus something. Got to share that middle side. So I make the n there, that shared side. 3 squared plus something squared equals 5 squared. Have you figured out that that's always going to be 4 when the hypotenuse is 5 and one of the legs is 3? So n equals 4. Now I can solve for the yellow triangle. 4 squared plus something squared equals 10 squared. That's x squared equals 84, which simplifies down to 2 square root 21. Number 13, hopefully you see, is like number 8. So we got to chop it into the rectangle and the right triangle. My rectangle side, there's 4 there, there's 9 there. So I have my right triangle, 9 is one of the sides, 15 is the hypotenuse. But this part here isn't x. Let me back this up. Remember, the whole side of that is x. This whole segment here, part of that side is 4. Now we could say that that's x minus 4, but instead let's just make it some variable like n. So that can go x equals 4 plus just something. Now I can just say 9 squared, leg squared plus n squared equals 15 squared, and go and solve and get that n is equal to 12. When you solve this, you should get n is equal to 12. So then x is equal to 4 plus 12, which is 16. That one was a little bit more tricky maybe than 8, but the same process here. We've got to solve for the smaller triangle before being able to add those pieces together. All right, other side of the page. This is a straight up Pythagorean theorem. Got 2 sides given. The hypotenuse is x. Square root of 68 is 2 square root 17. Number 15. Hopefully you see that there's the big daddy right triangle with the altitude. So we're going to use the hypotenuse and the parts of the hypotenuse to solve for x and y, the legs. X shares a triangle with 10 and 7. So it's going to equal the square root of 7 times 10, which is 70, of course. But how does that break down? 7 times 2 times 5, nothing comes out. That's square root 70. Y is going to equal the square root of 3 times 10. Nothing comes out of this either. It's the square root of 30 is what y is. That's the geometric mean there. All right, 2 diagonals of a rhombus have length of 12 and 16. Step 1, draw your rhombus. The 2 diagonals of a rhombus are 12 and 16. Draw the diagonals. Remember, if this whole thing is 12, what do the 2 diagonals do to each other? They make midpoints. So the 12 becomes 6 and 6. The 16 becomes 8 and 8. So now I have the diagonals are perpendicular, please recall. So I have 2 sides of my right triangle given. The hypotenuses are the sides of the triangle, or the rhombus rather, so I'm going to call that x. 6 squared plus 8 squared equals, have you figured out this pattern? 6, 8, and what? You get 10. 6, 8, 10. So the question asks for the perimeter. That's all of these sides added together. We figured out that this side is 10. Because it's a rhombus, all the sides are 10. So 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 is 40. If 2 sides of a rectangle are 5 and 12, well, let's draw that. 5 and 12 is a rectangle. The diagonal cuts across, making my right triangle. The diagonal is the hypotenuse, so 5 squared plus 12 squared equals the diagonal squared. Simplify and solve, you get 13. 5, 12, and 13. If the 3 sides of an isosceles triangle are 17, 17, and 16, well, let's start off by drawing that. 17 and 17, those are my 2 congruent sides. I got this 16 is the one that's not. The altitude is the thing that's going to make the right angle here. There's my right triangle. My length of altitude I just called x. What does the altitude do to the 16? Well, it chops it in half. 8 and 8. Now, Pythagorean theorem. When we solve, I get 15. 8, 15, and 17 is I'm throwing you some of the common ones here. Number 19, the perimeter of a rhombus is 60. Well, a rhombus, the perimeter is all the sides added together. Because it's a rhombus, all the sides are the same. So each of the sides, 60 divided by 4 is 15. So 15 is what the length of each side is. And one diagonal is 24. Remember, what do the diagonals do to each other in this parallelogram? It splits the 24 into 12 and 12. My neighbor's doing yard work over there. Sorry about that. 12 and 12. And then this other one is going to get split in half too. I call that x and x. I don't know what they are. That's what I'm trying to figure out. So I go solve for this. X squared plus 12 squared equals 15 squared. X equals 9. 9, 12, 15. And so because that x is 9, that x is 9, the answer is 18. Both of those added together equals 18. All right, that's all the stuff. Those types of questions are the ones going to be on your quiz next class. But let's not forget what we've learned here. All of this stuff is to try to help you remember this process. Multiply to go from the shorter length to the longer length. Divide to go from the longer length to the shorter length. The magic numbers here, 2 and 3, yes. And the magic number 45, 45, 90 is square root 2. Did I say 2 and 3? 2 and square root 3. All right, number 20. You know this is a 45, 45, 90 triangle because of the number 45 right there. Which side is the hypotenuse? Well, x is the hypotenuse, x 10 and y are the legs. It's an isosceles triangle. The legs are congruent. So if that's 10, then that's 10. Now, how do I go from the leg to the hypotenuse? I'm going from a smaller thing to a bigger thing, so I'm going to multiply by what magic number? 45, 45, 90, square root 2. So the hypotenuse is 10 times the square root 2, which is just simply 10 square root 2. A number that's not in a radical is not going to multiply. You don't get square root 20 or anything. It's just 10 square root 2. The next triangle, it's a 30, 60, 90. I can recognize that because of the 60-degree angle. What are these pieces? Well, 10 is the hypotenuse, opposite 90-degree angle. The short leg is always opposite the 30-degree angle, and then the long leg is always opposite the 60-degree angle. So it gave us the hypotenuse. How do we go from the hypotenuse to the short leg? Well, it's going from the bigger thing to the smaller thing, so I divide by what? The magic number, hypotenuse to short leg, is 2. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. That's my short leg. Got the short leg to the long leg. I will multiply, smaller thing to bigger thing. Multiply by what? Square root 3. So the long leg is 5 times the square root of 3, which is simply 5 square root 3. Number 22, this is 30, 60, 90 triangle because of the 30-degree angle right there. The hypotenuse is y, x is the short leg, y is the long leg, 9 is the long leg. So we're given the long leg. We'll always go from either the long leg or the hypotenuse to the short leg in a 30, 60, 90. Bigger thing to smaller thing, 9 going to the 9 the long leg to x the short leg. I'm going to divide by magic number square root 3. Here I have to simplify. Square root 3 over the square root 3, I'll multiply that way. When I multiply the numerator, 9 times the square root of 3 is 9 square root 3. On the denominator, square root 3 times the square root of 3 is simply 3. Now this simplifies. The 9 and 3 will reduce, and we just get 3 square root 3. And finally, going from the short leg to the hypotenuse, I'm going to go smaller to bigger and multiply by the magic number 2. 3 square root 3 times 2 gets us 6 square root 2. Let me write that in, because I didn't. Thought I did. 6 square root 2. Okay, and then the last one. It's a 45, 45, 90 triangle. You know that because it's a 45-degree angle. Square root 22 is the hypotenuse. To go from the legs from the hypotenuse, bigger thing to smaller thing, divide by square root 2. It's our magic number. Square root 22 divided by square root 2, because both of those numbers are in the radical, I can reduce it. 22 over 2 is 11, so it becomes a square root 11, which is true for both of them. All right, hopefully that was helpful. Get what you need out of it. Ask me questions if you have them. Thanks. Goodbye.